Good morning or afternoon or whatever it is when you're listening. I am currently conducting a research project at the University of Vienna, and in the course of this project I work on an online etymological dictionary of Cisalpine Celtic. In this talk I want to essentially show you this dictionary in its current state and explain how it is constructed and why. The term Cisalpine Celtic refers to the remains of Celtic languages which were spoken on this, that is, the Roman side of the Alps. The Celtic languages which were spoken in northern Italy and the southwestern Alps, in orange here on the slide, are the earliest languages of that branch to be written down. Therefore, despite their relative scarcity and shortness, these documents and the language material they contain are of great value for the reconstruction of the history of Celtic, and in reverse, the fact that there is considerable medieval attestation of Celtic, and Celtic languages are still spoken in modern times, means that we can find more to say about these very early and fragmentary language documents of Celtic than about the inscriptions of other fragmentary languages from the same time and area, which often have no living or even no known relatives and are accordingly badly understood. In the 7th century BC, the alphabet was brought to the north of the Italian peninsula by the Etruscans. The Padan Plain and the Alpine region were inhabited by peoples who display a high variety in terms of language, but they all learned to write more or less simultaneously. The documents of Celtic languages are the yellow dots on the map. As of today, we have almost 500 Celtic inscriptions written in this epigraphic corpus, which date between the 6th century BC and the early Roman imperial age, when epicoric literacy in northern Italy came to an end. The inscriptions are mostly short, only 8 contain more than 5 words. The average for language encoding inscriptions is 3 words, and there are lots of very short graffiti which may be names abbreviated for workman's marks, but not all of these are certain to be strictly language encoding. As usual for fragmentarily attested languages, the bulk of the attestation is onomastic. We have personal names in funerary inscriptions, owner's inscriptions, and possibly secular gift inscriptions. The inscribed objects accordingly are mainly tombstones and ceramic vessels, and there are also coin legends. Lexical material is found in the longer inscriptions, but there's quite a lot of repetition due to text formulae. At this point it's hard to do anything but rough estimates, but for useful language material we have maybe somewhat more than 300 sequences that are best interpreted as personal names, excluding the abbreviated ones. We have up to 50 lexical nouns, though this is honestly a steep estimate and includes a lot of unclear sequences. We have 4 to 8 verbs, depending on whom you ask, and the odd pronoun and postposition. Of course, personal name formation in Old Celtic is to a certain extent productive and transparent, so there are data to be had also from most names. The thing with Cisalpine Celtic is that it is not actually a single branch of Celtic, but a cover term for at least 2 Celtic strata in northern Italy. On the one hand, we have the Celtic language called Lepontic, which was spoken by a local population in northwestern Italy already in the early Iron Age. The Lepontians are the people who learned to write from the Etruscans, and Lepontic is what we find in the oldest inscriptions. But then, throughout the late Iron Age, at least from the 4th century onwards, Gauls from beyond the Alps moved into northern Italy and settled there. We know this from the classical sources, and it can also be seen in the archaeological record. These people spoke various dialects of Gaulish, which are referred to as Cisalpine Gaulish, in opposition to Transalpine Gaulish, which is attested in France, though they are technically the same language. The Gauls learned to write from the Lepontians and became the dominant population. The Lepontians were slowly acculturated until all of Celtic Italy was swallowed up by Rome. So Cisalpine Celtic means both Lepontic and Cisalpine Gaulish. And with the fragmentary nature of the attestation, it's hard to tell these strata apart. It's not clear how similar these languages were and what the differences are, and we are currently working on the establishment of linguistic criteria for ascribing individual inscriptions to Lepontic or Gaulish. So here we have unique sources with important material for the study of Celtic, but they are written in a very marginal and not completely understood alphabet variant. Many are difficult to read, or of uncertain linguistic ascription in terms of Lepontic versus Gaulish, but also in terms of debatable cases from the chronological and geographical margins of the Cisalpine Celtic area, where it overlaps with those of neighboring literacies. So how to make this material accessible to a wider Keltological audience? Enter David Stifter, whom you have already heard or are going to hear, presenting his much larger lexicographical project on Old Irish. In 2009, David Stifter led a one-year project at the University of Vienna, whose aim was the creation of an online etymological dictionary of Cisalpine Celtic called Lexicon Leponticum. The software used for this dictionary is Semantic Media Wiki, an open-source application which was originally developed for Wikipedia. Because of the semantic extension, the content in LexLab is not only displayed as in Wikipedia, but is annotated and can be automatically searched and arranged by the user according to what they are interested in. However, LexLab as a whole is much more than a dictionary. It is technically an online edition of the source material. The slide shows the 10 content categories of LexLab. The site contains pages for all Cisalpine Celtic inscriptions, for the objects on which they are written, the find places and find contexts of these objects, and the repositories in which they are kept. There are pages for all letters which are used to write these inscriptions, the phonemes they denote, the words and numerals which are attested in the inscriptions, and the morphemes of which they are made up. Only this part here is the actual dictionary. Words are the attested forms, numbers are the attested numbers, and morphemes are the morphemes which can be identified in these forms. The rest is dedicated to the sources. This is necessary because it's impossible to create a defendable lexicon of Cisalpine Celtic from the sources by being prescriptive. Any discussion of the actual lemmata can of course be done in the dictionary entries themselves. Different options for or scholarly opinions about the analysis, the internal segmentation and etymology, the formal and lexical interpretation. In any respectable dictionary, this is done with reference to the sources, without there being the need to also present and discuss all these sources. But with a small corpus like the Cisalpine Celtic one, the first challenge is to extract the lemmata from the documents in the first place. This is due, roughly speaking, to uncertain readings and uncertain segmentation. Scholars have differing opinions about what certain inscriptions actually say. For example, the inscription on the Vergiate Stela contains 2 clauses. Of the 2 verbs, the first is well legible carite, which is also otherwise attested and means something like set up in the context of funerary monuments. The second one may also be carite, possibly poetic repetition of the word. The inscription has been argued to be metrical. But the damaged third letter in this word has also been read as lambda rather than ro, so kalite, which is not otherwise attested but can be furnished with a context-appropriate etymology. Also no repetition. Discussing the reading issues on the inscription page as well as the object page, because the debate about the reading involves the history of the artifact and the damage it sustained after its discovery, allows the users to make up their own minds about whether kalite is a chimera or not. The Vergiate inscription has word separators, but uncertainty and disagreement about the word forms an inscription contains can also stem from differing opinions on how a sequence without word separation should be segmented. For example, one of the oldest inscriptions in the corpus is the fragmentary Yuntanaka on a potsherd from the 7th century. Here, because of the high dating and the inconclusive letter forms, it is unclear whether the language of the inscription is actually Celtic or Etruscan. The sequence has been interpreted in numerous ways, as you can see on the slide, and none of them is convincing. Any choice we make in terms of lemmata must be justified by discussing the document's context. Also, the analysis and interpretation of texts, and therefore the function and meaning of words, as well as the linguistic ascription of the individual documents and the forms attested in them, is informed by their archaeological and orthographical context. We need space to discuss all this so that the users can form their own opinions. That space is the inscription page for the reading, the object page for the support as an archaeological artifact and its dating, etc. Talking about the inscriptions and readings also means discussing the writing, and letters have to be classified and accurately displayed. So once you have committed to a closely evidence-based treatment of the data, it is only a short step to a full online edition. I don't have time to do a tour of the site, but you can click around if you like. Here's the link to the list of inscriptions as a starting point. Just be advised that the site is unfinished and currently being revised. 1 year in the original project was nowhere near enough time to enter all these data and then build the actual dictionary from them. In my current project, Cisalpine Celtic Language and Literacy, I use LexLab as the basis for my research, and it's a sort of two-way relationship in that I am updating and completing LexLab and simultaneously extracting the data that are relevant for my research. As its title suggests, the project tackles both the epigraphic and the linguistic aspects of Cisalpine Celtic, but a major focus lies in the completion of the lexicon of forms, that is, the actual dictionary. As I showed you before, the dictionary part of LexLab consists of three elements: the list of attested forms, the list of attested numbers, and the morpheme list. We do not have a lot of certain number writing, so I will leave numbers aside in the following and show you the category word, that is the dictionary of attested forms, and the category morpheme, which is the morphological lexicon. This is the dictionary of attested forms in its current state. I can't scroll here, but you can see it says 676 attested forms are in this list at the moment. This number is significantly higher than the number of words which are in reality attested in the corpus. As I said earlier, deciding what our actual lemmata are is not always straightforward, and the uncertainty results in the inclusion of variation. We have to take into account differing readings, always provided that they are at all plausible. Since most words are attested only once, any variant reading makes a difference to the actual word list. Even if one would be prescriptive about this and just ignore readings one does not agree with, there are still a plethora of cases where no absolute decision can be justified. So in a case like that of the Vergiate stela, the variant reading calite must appear in the dictionary. In inscriptions with several segmentation options, like the Yuntanaka inscription, we do not necessarily turn every single potential segment into a lemma, but if two alternative segmentations were defendable here, all potential words would end up as lemmata. Or in cases where no proposal is more plausible than the others, we make the entire unsegmented sequence the lemma and discuss segmentation options on the word page. To get some control over this multiplication of attested forms, we can determine the status of a lemma as certain, which is the default, or probable, or uncertain. Calite, for example, is listed as uncertain. Another issue which conditions the high number of lemmata is the unfeasibility of normalization. There is variation inherent in the sources, orthographic variation, diachronic and dialectal linguistic variation, which we do not understand sufficiently well to be able to standardize with any pretense of confidence. For example, we have 4 inscriptions which appear to contain a Celtic theonym Poeninos, which is also known indirectly through Interpretatio Romana. Jupiter Poeninos was worshipped on the Great St. Bernard Pass in Roman times. But the name is not spelled the same twice in the Cisalpine Celtic corpus. There is Poeninos, an O-stem nominative, Poenino, an O-stem dative, Penini, which may be an O-stem genitive, and what looks like an N-stem dative Poenune. How these forms relate to each other is unclear, which are derivations and therefore separate words, and which are chronological, dialectal, or mere orthographic variants which should be normalized into one lemma. We don't know for certain. So all these sequences must appear as different words in the dictionary. Unless 2 attested forms are exactly identical in form and orthography, they are treated as different words. This also means that all forms in the dictionary are given in transliteration exactly as they appear in inscriptions. We do not transcribe because we do not understand the orthography well enough. We even keep attestations of the same words in different grammatical forms apart. This is also for reasons of uncertainty about the identicalness of the underlying forms. For example, adgoneti is probably the genitive of adgonetios, but theoretically it could be the genitive of a name variant without the -os affix adgonetos. But it's also because in our small corpus we want to keep track of the attestation of inflectional endings. This complete eschewal of interpretation and standardization makes the dictionary of attested forms more of an index than a dictionary. All the orthographical and linguistic variation, all the uncertainties, are accurately reflected in the forms of the lemmata. The evidence is not distorted by potentially faulty efforts at standardization and interpretation. This is very methodologically proper, but does not exactly improve the usability of the list of attested forms as a dictionary. In essence, the word pages, the dictionary entries, are extensions of the inscription pages for in-depth discussion of linguistic aspects, etymology, and so on. In system terms, their main function is the grammatical annotation. Here's an example of a dictionary entry. The list of attestations shows only one entry because this name is attested only once. The inscription has 4 lines without word separators, but in this case we are very convinced of our reading and analysis. The inscription contains 2 names, and Aklutsamo is one of them. The language is defined as Celtic because the Lepontic versus Gaulish thing is still under debate. It's a proper noun, a masculine O-stem personal name in the nominative. There is the morphemic and phonemic analysis, the translation, and then the commentary and automatic bibliography. All the data which are listed in the table at the top of the page are semantically annotated and therefore automatically retrieved and searchable. This provides searchability of the grammatical properties of the attested forms. Clicking on the name of a property takes you to a page where you can find statistics and, where necessary, definitions. I show you the page of the property word type. As an example, it has automatically generated lists of all words which are classified as proper nouns or any other word type. Equally, clicking on STEM class gives you the statistics for STEM classes, and of course an important property is language, for which we have shortcutted filters on the dictionary page itself. We analyze this name as Atklutsamowalos, which translates as very most famous prince. This is what I meant when I said that old Celtic names are often lexically and grammatically transparent. In this particular name, we can identify every single morpheme, and they are all linked here in the morphemic analysis. Clicking on the first morpheme ad gets me to the page of the morpheme ad, a prefix which means to but also has intensifying function, again with the annotated data and commentary and a list of attestations which has Aklutsamo in it. Now you see that unlike in Aklutsamo in the dictionary of attested forms, which is transliterated true to the orthography of the inscription and where this prefix is written as a, the morpheme ad is standardized, although it appears recognizably in its underlying form ad in not a single one of the forms in which it is attested, either because of assimilation as in Aklutsamo or because of spelling variation as in Adgonetio. And this is the point of the morphological lexicon. The function of the morphological lexicon is really twofold. For one, I mentioned earlier that we are also interested in the grammatical endings. The morphological lexicon includes all attested inflectional morphemes, for example, the O-stem nominative singular os, as in Aklutsamo, which duly appears in the list of attestations. But it also contains all lexical morphemes which can be identified in the attested forms. Every morpheme about which we can find anything at all to say, which we can compare to morphemes in Transalpine Gaulish or other Celtic languages, or which we can etymologize, is listed and discussed here. And because we can analyze, we can standardize. The morphological lexicon supplements the dictionary of attested forms by providing a list of attested or possibly attested morphemes in normalized archaic Gaulish spelling. Thereby, it serves as something closer to reference works of old Celtic languages, such as Xavier de la Mar's Dictionnaire de la langue gauloise, something more like a dictionary through which you can search for specific linguistic elements which are not masked by spelling quirks of the Lepontic alphabet, and from there you can proceed to the actually attested forms which might contain this morpheme. Additionally, the linking between morphemes and attested forms also creates links within the dictionary between the non-standardized attested forms which are related to each other. We do not conflate attested forms like the Celtic name Cassilos and the probable Latinized variant Cassilus, which are listed as separate lemmata because they are not identical, but they share both the base morpheme cas and the diminutive suffix il, and are thus linked together via these morpheme pages. So this is our strategy to serve both possible approaches to the material. The scholar who wants to find out about a particular Cisalpine Celtic form will reliably find it in the dictionary of attested forms because we did not impose necessarily rough and debatable normalizations upon the material. while the scholar who wants a reference lexicon to see whether and where a particular lexeme is attested in the Cisalpine Celtic inscriptions can check the Morphological Lexicon, where the entries look as they are expected to look in an Old Celtic language. It may seem unnecessarily complicated at first to have essentially two separate lexica which only make sense together, but I think that this is preferable to a compromise which would force us to subject the forms to half-hearted standardization and would affect both source accuracy and usability. Thank you.